Hi, everybody, and welcome back to Biology Bios. My name is Jim Edelman. I'm an associate professor in the Department of Biological Sciences at the University of Memphis, and my purpose with this podcast is really twofold. First, I want to let folks know that most Thursdays during the semester, we have talks by visiting researchers at 4 p.m. in Ellington Hall. And that's folks from all over the country and world talking about the really cool biological research that they do. The second purpose is to have those folks here learn a little bit more about them, how they got where they are, and what really excites them about the research they do. In addition, I'd like to say a quick disclaimer that I borrowed these questions from Rhett Miller's excellent podcast called Wheels Off, so please check that out as well. But without further ado, let's get to this week's guest. Thanks so much for being here. Well, Dr. Scott Sakaluk, thanks so much for being here and welcome to Biology Bios.
All right. Thank you, Jim. It's a real pleasure to be here.
So I'm super excited that we get to do this one in person. I do a lot of these on Zoom and, it's good, but it loses something.
It's not the same as face-to-face sitting in the same room.
Yeah, absolutely. So to kind of kick us off here, could you give a quick intro of who you are, what you do with the broadest brushstrokes of your research interests, where you do that sort of thing?
Sure. So I am an emeritus professor at Illinois State University in the School of Biological Sciences. Emeritus, to those of you who aren't familiar with that, is someone who is retired but still research active. And I still have an active lab. I still co-advise graduate students. I've always been passionate about the research that I do, so I still continue to do that. I work on a couple of different systems. I started out as a person who was interested in the evolution of insect mating strategies, and I'm still very much interested in that. In the early 2000s, I also became interested because of a colleague in a migratory bird species, house wren, which is a very common bird species, which is a really wonderful system to study. If you've got interesting questions about parental care or about mating strategies in birds. We've even done things that study immune responses of birds in response to breeding and a number of other interesting what are called ecophysiological questions. That's sort of kind of a bipolar researcher in that sense.
Okay. So with that sort of diversity of study system, diversity of questions, what is a project that you're working on currently? And why is that project particularly exciting to you?
So, because I'm talking today about the insect side of my life, I'll talk a little bit about that, just because that's cool. What's on my mind.
Yeah.
So I'm interested broadly in the evolution of insect mating tactics, and I'm especially interested in a tactic that's fairly pervasive in insects, and that is the provision of nuptial food gifts. And people, geez, what is a nuptial food gift? But the name nuptial maybe gives a part of it away. It's a gift of food that the male either synthesizes himself with his own body, or it might be an insect prey that he catches, but it's a nuptial gift because invariably it's offered to the female either before or during mating. Mm-hmm. And this has been an evolutionary puzzle for a long time because individuals are supposed to act according to conventional evolutionary theory in their own best fitness interests. So you might ask, well, why is a male insect giving a gift of food to a female? And that was really the starting point for my initial kind of interest in insect mating systems. Since then, I've started to delve far more deeply into what this sort of tactic has meant in terms of the subsequent evolution of how females respond to these gifts and the chemistry of these gifts. Mm-hmm. And here's the I guess I would say the general theme for your the folks listening to this podcast, and that is this gift of food almost invariably allows the male to access the female's physiology because he's giving her something that she's ingesting.
Mm-hmm.
And the basic seed I want to plant in your audience's mind is that having secured that access to her reproductive physiology, we might think that maybe the male is not entirely innocent in terms of what his evolutionary intents are, that he might be using this as a means to manipulate the female in ways that are commensurate with his best interests, even if they're detrimental to her interests. So one way he could do that, for example, is if in these gifts there are substances that say act on her reproductive system, so she manufactures more eggs that are fertilized by his sperm. Or it could be, as we think in some cases, substances which turn off female sexual receptivity so that she's less likely to mate with another male.
Mm-hmm.
And then that's going to also further his interests. Now, that might not be in the interest of the female, right? Because we know in lots of different animal species, including many insect species, females benefit by mating with more than one mating partner.
Right.
And that's also across animal mating systems, that is the rule. That's not the exception. It's the rule that females mate with multiple males. And so females then are going to be under equal pressure to ensure that their interests are being satisfied, and they're going to evolve countermeasures that, say, provide an antidote to this attempt by the males to chemically manipulate them.
Yeah.
So that may sound, I suppose, really esoteric to your listeners. And I guess I would say one of the kind of practical benefits of these types of studies is, look, insects collectively, both in terms of economic damage that pests cause and also in terms of the pollination benefits that insects offer, if you can identify substances, novel substances that are influencing female receptivity or influencing female egg laying, those could be really useful to people that are attempting to solve particular problems, either on the plus side or the negative side.
Absolutely. I mean, it's also just pretty darn cool evolutionary biology.
Well, of course, that's the primary. That's my passion.
Mm-hmm.
I'm interested in evolutionary questions, and I'm interested in how animals in general solve problems related to finding a mating partner, a suitable mating partner, and then maximizing their own reproductive success.
Yeah.
And there's a whole suite of adaptations, as you know, that we observe in all kinds of animal taxa. Insects are awesome in this regard because insects have the most bizarre array of accoutrements and devices and weird and wonderful kind of things that really inspire these types of studies.
Yeah, I get jealous of insect systems when I working on birds all the time, and I just see these insect systems that are so distracting because they're so cool and they're just so wild. It's this sort of like alien sort of like that's so very hard to comprehend from our vertebrate brain, right?
Well, it is, and I think what research in this area does for you is that you soon get disabused of the idea that insects are just these simple little robots that are not terribly sophisticated. They have incredibly sophisticated strategies for any number of kind of biological kind of realms, and they're a great study organism to test these types of ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. So, all right, so I'm gonna pivot on this one, using insects to kind of ask this question. Where I'll ask a bit more about like your history and how you got where you are. Was there a time that you knew that you wanted to be a scientist? Or was this a sort of gradual discovery? Did insects play a role? Were you the guy who was in the backyard trying to figure out what the ants were doing when you were a kid?
No, I was not that guy.
Oh, okay.
I had really no interest in insects for most of my life. I So where I really got interested and passionate in biology was not until my senior year. It took that long. And I was talking to some graduate students over lunch about this, that it was only in my senior year where I ran into a faculty member who became my undergraduate advisor, where I first understood how natural selection really works. And up until that point, the kind of instruction I'd received in this sort of really, incredibly potent mechanism for driving evolutionary change were these kind of nebulous idea that things evolve for the benefit of the species. These really erroneous kind of ideas that you still see undergraduates and even some kind of graduate students like parroting this kind of stuff. When I understood how natural selection operates at the level of the individual organism, it just like there was this explosion. Really, I know it sounds trite, but it was just this explosion of awareness of. I finally understood how biology works. It was life-changing, and because at the time I was doing an undergraduate honors thesis on an insect species, on a cricket. I decided, I'm going to take this newfound awareness and I really want to understand a type of selection, sexual selection, which drives adaptations that are involved in acquiring mates. Specifically, the characters that make birds have this outlandishly beautiful feathers and plumage, the incredible vocalizations of frogs and some insects, the weaponry that we see associated with lots of mammals, the differences in body size, all of these incredible characteristics that we see in nature are driven, as you know, by sexual selection. And I really wanted to understand that. And I just saw insects and crickets in particular, as little more than a useful tool. That they have short generation times. You can produce them in large numbers. You can get really large sample sizes. Yeah. They do lots of interesting things. They have lots of bizarre sexual traits that have been driven by sexual selection. So I'll never be one that says, "Oh yeah, I fell in love with crickets," or "I fell in love with," because I didn't. I fell in love with the ideas. And it was the crickets and other insects that I've since worked with, and even the birds that I now work with, I view as tools to test interesting ideas. Yeah. So when I have students that write me, or they don't now because I am retired, but when they used to write me, and if I thought they were too much interested in the organism as opposed to the interesting questions, I wasn't so much interested in them. It was like, it's good to be passionate about the organisms you study. That's fine. Sure. But if you're a biologist, first and foremost are the concepts and the questions. And your choice of a study system should be, is this a good system with which to study the questions that you're interested in? Yeah. Yeah. I feel like that was a lot of my training as well, that was always the perspective that like my advisors had. I've gotten advice over the years from different perspectives, and I think, it can work another way. I had one person on my committee who asked, who would say like, okay, so what sort of organisms are you most interested in? All right. So that's going to hold your emotion and your excitement. Now, what questions are you going to ask? And for me, I was very much similar to you. Like that wouldn't work for me. Like I fell into birds because like that's who I ended up working with. And then I was like, oh, okay, yeah, you can actually answer all these cool questions. And I've been going down that path. I took a little side detour with some collaborations in monarchs. So I got to work on insects a little bit. To be fair, and I do want to be fair, I understand people, for example, who study birds. Birds are awesome, right? And so I don't want to be disingenuous and say that I haven't had students that are really passionate about birds, but that at the same time they've also been passionate about understanding how birds work.
Yeah,
and so I'm okay with that.
I agree.
I wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to kind of chase away the intrinsic enthusiasm that people have for the things that they study. I'm just saying, that's not how I got started. And I'm kind of look through things, through that lens.
Sure. Yeah. And I think, there can be questions that are super important, that are super specific of this creature in this habitat, especially conservation questions and that sort of thing. But yeah, I'm similar to you. I want to know the big, well, why and who else might do this and why might they do that? And that definitely resonates with me. Okay. So this got you into science, thinking about these big questions. I'm going to try to transition this one. This one's always a tough one to transition to. So as you're thinking about these big questions, and I find, I'm doing a lot of stumbling. I find this an odd question to ask somebody who's at your stage, who's had this great career, tons of accolades. But as we're thinking of questions, as we're doing our work, we get a lot of criticism from the outside. We have a lot of reviewers that let us know what they think. But I find that I also generate criticism myself, right? And I'm wondering, what's your experience been with that sort of self-generated criticism over the years, and how do you, I don't know, either silence that critic or make that critic work for you?
So that is a very tough question for me to answer, because I've never felt that I've been sufficiently self-critical.
Huh.
I've always felt that too often I've looked at my science and looked at my results a little bit too optimistically and a little too much through rosy-colored glasses. And this is why I think peer review, whether it's reviewers for journals or reviewers of granting agencies like National Science Foundation and National Institutes of Health, why peer review is such a critical part of the scientific enterprise, because they keep you honest.
Yeah. And
I will say this. I've had, so I've published a few papers, and, I have 34
Just
years at ISU. and I've had some reviews that I thought, geez, that's quite unfair and not very thoughtful. And you kind of, well, you respond, but you're not too impressed. But you know what? I've had lots of other cases where I've gotten criticisms back and really thoughtful, incisive comments that point out genuine weaknesses in the science and that point out, hey, your interpretation of this, you have failed to account for the fact of X, Y, and Z, and you haven't considered that this variable here might explain your results just as much as your little pet hypothesis does. And that's why, I mean, that's kind of the beauty of it. It's not for everybody, right? You've got to have a thick skin.
Yeah.
But I have found, I would say more often than the first case where I said, oh, yeah, you get some, you're always going to get some comments that are not very thoughtful because someone's done it in a hurry or they don't really care. But I'll tell you what, I've had any number of papers where I think, or grant proposals that have had to been rejected, and then you resubmit based on the reviewer's comments, where I think this is really better because this person thought deeply about this and thought a little more critically about this than I did when I submitted this. So that's why I say, it's not like I'm not capable of saying, yeah, I see a weakness in that. And if I've got, I work, advise students, oh man, there's some problems with this design. We need to kind of work on this. But I don't think I've ever been as self-critical as I think you ought to be in this business.
Well, I mean, I think you raise a good point, though. And especially if you embrace those interactions, so you can seek out, internal reviews and friendly reviews, so to speak, right? Where you ask your colleagues to, take a sharp eye at my proposal and tell me what you think is wrong. And then you also get these anonymous reviewers that are going to do that for you as well. I do think that's a really good perspective to try to approach those with the attitude that you described of like, we're trying to make knowledge here, and we're trying to rule out possibilities. And I mean, no one of us can see every angle of a problem.
No, that's true. But I will also say there are limits to this, right? Because you do get review. I mean, I would say to any young investigator that never let naysayers get in the way of publishing what you think is your best work, or work that is really contributing to expanding an area of inquiry. Because the easiest thing in the world to do, of course, as you know, is to discourage a young investigator. That's the easiest thing in the world to do. And so, you have to be careful with reviews and how you respond to them. As I said, these reviews can be incredibly helpful, but there's sometimes you get comments where they're basically suggesting, maybe you ought to shelve this one and try again. And there have just been times where I just flat out refuse to do that. No, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to let some naysayer get in the way of putting an interesting idea out there, and let the scientific community vet this. I mean, I'm not going to let one person make that decision for me. So, I just want to be careful not to give the impression that you should just sort of wholesale accept what people tell you, and because sometimes you just got to be stubborn, and that is one trait I'm good at.
It can be a superpower, man. So all right, so you kind of walked the very direction I want to go on the next question, which is about advice for students, for people that are earlier in their career. So I generally ask, like, if you met that undergrad version of yourself working in today's world of research and science and biology, what advice would you have for that person?
Well, some of my advice is predicated on the fact that I, as an advisor and a mentor, have grown up too in terms of my advice. So the advice I would give now is very much different than the advice I would have given when I was first starting out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Where when I was, my first few students, I had this idea in my head that you come and work in my lab, you're going to have to be a mini-me. I was trying to produce mini-me's, and it didn't take me long, but it took me a couple of years to figure out, you know what? Your job as a mentor is to identify what it is that the student wants to do. What is their dream? And it might not, and here's the thing you got to appreciate, that might not all align with what your personal aspirations had been.
Sure.
Might be completely different. But so far I haven't really said anything, well, what advice I would give. And the advice I give, general advice is, one, pursue whatever your passion is. If you figure out as a graduate student, even if you're working in a high-powered research lab, that you're really crazy about teaching, you discover you're passionate about teaching, then don't let you had this expectation that you were going to be, and your advisor has this expectation you were going to be a high-powered researcher. Don't let that determine what you're going to do. Mm-hmm. Follow your passion. And the other piece of advice I give people, because you and I have both been in the same situation, right? Where you've got your degree, but oh man, are you going to get a postdoc? I mean, they're really competitive. Gosh,
there's a lot of anxiety around that. Yeah.
You get your postdoc, and it's like, oh man, the job market's really tough. I wonder if I'm going to even, am I going to be working at McDonald's? And
right.
and because I recognize that everybody has that anxiety now, excuse me, I tell students, and it's true, I have never met a single young investigator who was truly determined and truly passionate about what they're doing not succeed in getting to where they want to go. Not a one. I mean, I've not met anyone who just were determined, by God, I don't care how bad the job market is. I don't care how many people they're firing, for example. I'm going to succeed. And just that determination. And that's why I say, don't be dissuaded by naysayers.
Yeah.
Don't be dissuaded by all the negative news. And, you can't let that get in the way.
Yeah. Yeah. I like to tell people, this is something that I've done over the years, is like, get a lot of advice, hear a lot of different voices, and figure out, which ones resonate with you. And some of those naysayers, I think, go into that category. It's like, listen to them, try to see where they're coming from. And if it's just if it doesn't make sense to you, you can keep moving on.
Yeah. Well, the other thing I tell young investigators or graduate students is trust your gut.
Yeah.
That's what you were just saying there. You really have to trust your own instincts. They rarely will steer you wrong. Listen to that voice in the back of your head, and you'll be fine.
Yeah, I definitely have not listened to that voice a number of times. And then you have that, I should have listened.
Yeah. I think all of us have been there, Jim, once in a while.
So, all right. So we've talked about sort of what you do when you're sciencing and how you kind of facilitate that with other people. But what do you do outside of science? So you've retired. Like, what else are you doing these days?
So when I wasn't retired, really. My research and my job, that was also my hobby. I mean, I was really immersed in my work. It was a big part of my identity. Retiring was a bit of a challenge in the sense that it was such a big part of my identity. I feared, I was a little anxious about that.
Yeah.
What I discovered is that I could still continue to do some of the things that I love to do. So as I told you, I'm still involved in research. But, I've always had a love of traveling. My wife and I are doing a lot more traveling now, which you can't do when, you've got lectures 3 days a week or 4 days a week. You're not going to go traveling anywhere. And we love to travel. We love to hike. So we're doing a lot more of that.
Where have you guys been going?
Well, so we went to in January, we went to Sedona. The year before that, or the winter before that, we went to Costa Rica, did some hiking in the Sonoran Desert in Arizona. We've gone to Belgium, been several times to Germany.
Yeah.
So that's what we like to do. And wherever we go, like I say, hiking is a big part of it. I'm now going to confess to something that really will target me as an official old person. We have taken up pickleball. We have become pickleball fanatics. So we play pickleball 3 or 4 times a week. Hey, look, you got to keep limber. He's
doing podcasts. He's playing pickleball.
Yeah. Hey, man, I'm doing it all.
Oh, that's funny. I mean, it looks like good exercise to me.
Yeah, anybody can pick it up in like 10 minutes. You can play pickleball, and it's a game mostly of positioning. It's not. And you get exercise, but it's hard to hurt yourself in pickleball. It's not like tennis. It's a very sociable game.
Nice.
So yeah. We really are enjoying that. And that's something I never would have done if I were still a full-time faculty member.
Yeah.
Just no time for that.
Yeah. It's hard to find that. I mean, I'm teaching an intro bio course now, and it's hard to find the time to like do the healthy things that you need to do as one gets to be a certain age and realizes he needs to work out again. but yeah, the time, it gets hard to find, man.
The hardest, so I did 4 rotations in our big introductory class, like 388 students in a big auditorium. And I mean, I enjoyed the challenge of that.
Sure.
And it was a good experience, and I felt I was helping to carry my weight in terms of the big service courses. And I did some other service courses as well, but that was the biggest one. if you're doing that well, and I know I'm preaching to the choir here, it's energy draining because when you've got a bunch of first-year students or second-year students, but mostly first-year students, you need to teach and you need to present yourself in a way where they think there's no other place you want to be than standing in front of them and teaching them interesting stuff about biology. And because look, and it's even harder now with the telephones and the this and the that and the distractions. You gotta go in there and you got to be prepared to engage. And that's hard work. A lot of people I think a lot of lay people don't appreciate how hard that is till they've had to stand up in front of 388 students who are basically saying, okay, mister, entertain me. Yeah. Show me what you got. You know?
I was just going to quote Nirvana and say, here we are now, entertain us.
Oh, I like that. I'm not even sure now our students would get that cultural reference. I know. But
that's the problem.
You're dating yourself.
All of my pop culture references that I try to engage students with, I'm like, oh yeah, that missed the mark. but yeah, it's cool though, and I think it's tough, right? But like I've been able to take the perspective on good days, especially when we get to relearn this cool biology that maybe we don't engage with every day. I mean, I just taught about fungi. We're talking about plants now. And I'm like, man, this stuff is cool. Yeah. It's not at all related to my research, but it's cool.
And the funny thing is, it's stuff that when we first got exposed to as undergraduates, oh man, this is kind of boring. And then your instructor, you're having to teach this stuff and you're having to relearn or learn maybe for the first time.
Yeah.
And boy, it can be fun though, learning about.
Agreed.
I mean, you know what? It sounds a bit embarrassing almost, but when I taught our introductory course, there were times where I was barely one step ahead of the students because it covers such a wide range of material that you haven't even thought about for like 20 years. And now suddenly you got to explain this stuff to students.
Yeah.
You better know it.
Yeah, definitely been a lot of work, but it's cool. And I think at the end of it, it just feels good to me to have that familiarity with that topic. It's like going outside and knowing what the trees are. For some reason, that just feels good to me to be like, oh, there we go. There we got a hickory. Yeah. I used to be really good at that, but now I'm just like, that's a hickory. I can't tell you what kind it is. But it's just something about feeling like you're part of that by just understanding it a little bit better.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're kind of coming towards the end here, and I like to throw things back at you and say, what else do you wish that I'd asked you about that I didn't ask you about?
Oh gosh, nothing really pops out. I have to admit, we've covered a lot of territory.
We did a lot of ground there.
Yeah. I mean, we've talked a little bit about teaching philosophies. We talked about advising. We've talked about my research and the antecedents of that. So we've covered it. I'm not sure
we got to pickleball, man. I mean,
you've been very thorough, Jim. So I don't know what to tell you.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Thank you very much. And really, this has been an absolute pleasure. I'm really glad we could do it in person. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was, Jim. And thank you so much for this opportunity. I got to tell you, by the way, I'm going to steal this idea, bring it back to Illinois State, because I think this kind of outreach and having speakers come in and do this is brilliant.
Oh, well, I didn't pay Scott to say that.
Yeah. No, he did not. I can verify that.
But thank you very much. And you'll hear when I said this to you, you'll hear that I did steal these questions from a musician that has a podcast that I really like.
Perfect.
So, thanks again, Rhett Miller.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we'll look forward to your talk this afternoon. And again, thanks so much.
Thank you, Jim. Looking forward to it.
All right. Thank you so much again to our guest, Dr. Scott Sakaluk. Unfortunately, we recorded this on the day that he gave his talk, so I can't plug his talk, but check out his website. You can see links to the critters he works on and a bunch of papers and more information. And thanks so much for being here.